So, welcome to the PranaTech podcast, episode one, with a very special guest that I've known for quite some time, over the past decade or so. Dave Ferrera, welcome to the show. Um, Dave is a medical device executive out of the SoCal area, mostly in the neurospace, and I'll let him intro himself.
Thanks, Amit. Thanks for having me. Yes, we've known each other more than a decade. I don't even know what time, at least a decade. But yes, I am in Southern California, born and raised in the Boston area, but I lived there first 30 years of my life. And now I've been on the West Coast for 27 years, primarily developing devices for the neurovascular field, ischemic stroke, hemorrhagic stroke, most recently venous sinus stenosis. Um, I'm also CEO of a medical device venture studio called RC Medical. 2021, we changed our business strategy, and instead of doing one company, we did three. So we started three companies in 2021, got them all financed, and we continued to get them financed and get product approvals. But happy to be on your show and get started.
Great, great. Yeah, looking forward to our conversation. And yeah, just the background on how we met. Dave gave me one of my first internships in the MedTech, med device industry. And one of the things I really appreciate about you is that at the time, you flew me out from Long Island. I was at Stony Brook, and I was taking a break from school to get some live experience. And obviously Irvine's a very big place for tech talent. But for some reason, I got a chance with you and your team. I did the interview I remember with Jake and Ryan and Randall. So those guys are, definitely a big part of your team, and they've been around with you. So, yeah, talk about that. Talk about your team. The same people that have been with you for. I can't even assign an amount. You tell the crowd. Like how long have they been with you? And like this is one of the things I look up to you about. How you kind of had the same kind of crew, same squad over time. So I would love to hear more.
It is about the team, and that's something even investors will tell you before they even consider investing is who's on your team and why are they on your team. Really, I met Randall Takahashi 2007, 2008 when we co-founded Mindframe. That exited to Covidien in 2011. That's when we formed Blockade Medical, who is where you interned. That's where we met Jake Lee. We hired Jake. We hired Dawson Lee also. So I've been really with Jake, Dawson, and Randall since 2011. So, going 14 or more years. I've been with Randall for almost 20 years now. And we all do very different things. We're all engineers, but I don't design or develop any products anymore. I mostly work with physicians. I understand problems. I have some solutions in my head, but I'll come back to Jake and Randall and Dawson, who are also very, very different. Jake is that practical device guy. Randall's thinking about how we can manufacture it, and Dawson does the manufacturing. So we have a very unique group. We do four different things, but we do it very well. Once I think we have a solution, I'll actually co-found the company. I'll write the pitch deck. I'll be involved in the financing. Then I'll continue to add to the team. But it's almost like a sporting event. I mean, you can't have two people on the pitcher's mound or three quarterbacks. I mean, you have your own role. You got right person, right seat. And sometimes the right person's not in the right seat and you got to make a change. But it is all about the people on the team. And I've been fortunate enough to work with the same people for, 10, 15, almost for 2 decades now.
Yeah, it's great to hear. And if you can kind of elaborate, about like why Blockade Medical started, right? About your, I believe it was your grandpa, or someone in your family that kind of had, an issue in the neurospace, and was that motivation for you?
Well, I get into the neurovascular. Well, I get into the medical device field because of my grandfather. I was in college. I was finishing up my junior year, 1989, and I was living away from home, not too far away. But my father had called me. No cell phones back then, and I happened to answer the phone, and that's when he said that my grandfather had an ischemic stroke. They didn't know what that was. I drove back home. It was about an hour drive, and met a neurologist, knew I was studying engineering and, potentially getting into medical field. And he told me on the spot, hey, there's nothing we can do for your grandfather. I mean, there wasn't even the drug TPA was not even around back then. There was nothing. So he said they would try to make him feel comfortable, and hopefully the stroke wouldn't manifest into a hemorrhagic stroke, which would be a blood, a burst blood vessel. But he ended up passing away a couple of weeks later. That gave me the idea to get into medical. And I still didn't know anything about the medical field. There was a company, though, in Massachusetts called USCI, which eventually became a division of Bard. And they were the first ones to make angioplasty catheters for the heart. So they were the first PTCA catheters, and I interned there just as you did. Learned about injection molding, met some great managers, eventually graduated in 91. I moved to Tempe, Arizona. Still didn't work in the neurovascular field. It actually wasn't a neurovascular field back then. But I went to work for a company called Impra that made vascular grafts. They also made dialysis catheters. So I ran the extrusion line, ran the molding machine, and I made these subclavian dialysis catheters. Within about a year, I moved back to Boston, worked for Boston Scientific. A big company just had gone public in 92. I also ran extrusion. I worked on catheters, braided catheters, braid reinforced catheters, and that's when I got my first exposure to the neurovascular field. I worked on a catheter called the Renegade High Flow, and I also met a chief scientist there named Jim Wong. And Jim Wong had told me, get into stroke. And there was that word. I'm like, stroke, what is stroke? And I explained about my grandfather. He said, that's going to be the future. There will be therapies that are getting developed to treat a brain aneurysm, which is a hemorrhagic stroke, or an occluded vessel, which is ischemic stroke. And right around that time, Target Therapeutics, which was in the Bay Area, had invented, which unbeknownst to me, invented the first detachable coil for brain aneurysm therapy. 5 years later, I co-founded my first company called Neurovascular, and we were competing against that company, Target Therapeutics, which got bought by Boston Scientific within, I think, 5 months of me and a few other people starting Micros. But it wasn't until another 10 years later when I co-founded Mindframe, that was the ischemic stroke device that would have helped my grandfather in 1989, 18 years before. So it took a long time to get any of these therapies to marketplace, but now in medical devices, there's all types of solutions for the brain, the heart. Now there's AI, there's recording devices. So MedTech has come such a long way since I was exposed to this in 1989.
Wow, that's amazing. So how would you say, from your experience, like how has regulatory strategy changed from then to now? Like how's the paradigm shifted, I would say?
Oh boy.
It's a heavy question, I know.
I mean, when I was starting, even at Impra, I wasn't involved in regulatory at all. It wasn't until I get into Micros in 97, I began to learn about the regulatory field. There was CE mark back then. There was also FDA, of course, and there were 510Ks and PMAs. I still remember Peter Hudson. He was the head of the division at the FDA that approved neurovascular medical devices. He then left, and Carlos Pena took over from him, and now it's Lin Zhang. So it's really 3 people over 30 years. The pre-submission meeting was not even a thing in the 90s.
I was going to ask that.
I mean, that came about probably in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And if anybody is developing a medical device, I would be an advocate for the pre-submission meeting. It still takes time. You got to, prepare for it, submit it, get the approval from the FDA, and you have your call. It's free. It's free inside. On the European side, CE mark, big changes from MDD to MDR in the past couple of years. MDD though it was actually a process not too dissimilar than the FDA, but less reliant upon running human safety studies. Now everything requires a human safety study. Um, but the notified body who will review the ISO standards and help you get CE mark, they essentially become your business partner. Now you pay them to do this. Unlike the FDA is a government agency. Um, in most cases, they're not the expert, and they know they're not the expert, and they know you're the expert. But there's not a tight collaboration with FDA as there is with you and your notified body. Um, but still, I think it is evolving. You know, the FDA has these pre-submission meetings to kind of help with the discussion and Q&A. And so then when you do file for either a 510K or do file for your IDE, there is a greater understanding on the FDA side and your side. And then with your notified body, they really are your business partner in Europe. I've been working with DQS for over 20 years, almost had the same reviewer with the same person, Manfred Beckold. Um, they really guide and help you because they are taking on the risk with you as your notified body. Um, but you know, you really got to pick a good notified body. You have to, you know, always utilize the pre-submission meeting. But I mean, a lot has changed in the 25 years that I've been working in this field in regulatory approval. And this is your field now. This is your sandbox. So, you know, you have to hire an expert, hire a good consultant, adds to your team. So never do these things on your own. Like never file a patent on your own. Get a patent attorney. Okay, don't do your own surgery. Go see a doctor. These things are all important to work with experts.
Yeah. Talk about CMS codes and like your experience with that, because I think a lot of people, you can have the best idea, the most novel idea, something really cool, something really innovative, but CMS insurance, how does that kind of tie into the whole strategy, and how do you even kind of confirm that strategy? Like, well, how do you do it?
If you're developing a medical device, and then you get a regulatory approval, and you don't know how to commercialize it because there's not a reimbursement code, you don't have a business. So you have to, if you hear of a problem, you have a solution, a product, you really want to identify what is the path to the marketplace, either 510K, PMA, CE mark. Sometimes there's not an indication approved for that device because physicians are using products off label. They might be using a carotid stent to treat the venous sinus stenosis. I'm experiencing that right now with our company Sonoris. In the past, I've always worked in the subarachnoid aneurysm space, ischemic stroke space, where there were, there was an ICD-10 code that had a DRG that could pay for the product in the United States under Medicare, Medicaid, or private insurance, and then they had a CPT code, which is the code that pays the doctor for their services. So I never had an experience until now about who is CMS and why do I need CMS. If you're in a field that does not have a product approval path for the product that you're on, then you need to do in parallel path having a way to get the disease you're treating under a DRG, and then get the procedure that is going to be used to treat that disease under a CPT code. And the CPT code, that's how the physician gets paid. The societies, like in my field, the SNIS, the SVIN, that uses interventional devices inside the brain, they want to make sure too that their members are getting paid. So you can work with the society to get a CPT code or get a CPT code expanded. But if you want to get your therapy under a DRG code, then you have to work with CMS, but you use a consultant. So we're actually doing that right now. There are DRG codes for the treatment of cerebral diseases, but they're really tied into cerebral arterial diseases, not cerebral venous diseases. And the codes that physicians are using to associate their off-label procedures with this it's not a precise science yet. So one way to get more involved or get more attention from CMS is to go through what's called breakthrough indication. And breakthrough is also a whole new pathway established by the FDA roughly 10 years ago. So if you have a new procedure or a life-saving procedure, and you want to have more dialogue with FDA, or improve the reimbursement codes, getting breakthrough is the best way to do that. It's not absolutely required, but it definitely improves your chances of communicating more with the FDA versus relying on the pre-submission meeting or talking to CMS, because now you have a breakthrough technology. CMS will then look at this and then they'll expand the DRG code to allow the treatment of that therapy. So I'm not an expert on CMS, I'm not an expert on DRGs or CPT codes, but we work with a great consultant who actually comes from NAMSA. Once again, find the expert to do that, because if there's no way to get your product reimbursed, the hospital's not going to buy it.
Yeah,
So the hospitals,
very true.
they're not a not-for-profit. People think, oh, hospitals are wealthy. Well, hospitals treat a lot of indigent care, and they also do a lot of off-label, therapies, because the physician wants to treat the patient however they can. And it's extremely rare when a physician says, I can't treat you. It's not approved. I don't think that they would say that. But like in our case, on the venous sinus stenosis space, for the past decade or more, physicians have figured out that they can put carotid stents into the cerebral venous system. It's not that easy, but they figured out ways to get them there to treat patients who have IIH or papilledema or pulsatile tinnitus. We're going to be the first company to market that's designed a product specifically to access the cerebral venuses and treat pulsatile tinnitus. And then maybe our second indication will be to treat papilledema or possibly IH. But without a way to get reimbursement, you don't have a company. And without a way to get reimbursement, the hospital's not going to buy the product. So that is one of the check boxes you have to look at when you're, hey, I have a great idea. I have a great problem to solve. I have a good solution. I filed patents. Great. Well, is there a reimbursement code? If there's not, then maybe you're going to rethink that or work on that as part of your business strategy.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So even from my experience, like in the pre-submission process, some of those questions that you ask, or actually all the questions that you ask, is more of a art than a science in terms of how you phrase it and how you kind of pitch the question, right? And I think it's really important to ask the right questions to get the right answers, like really narrow it down. Is that the same kind of analogy you use for like CMS? It's more of an art than a science?
Yeah, because you only have 1 hour on these calls. So it isn't like you can be on this call with the FDA for, hey, let's have a Zoom call for 4 hours.
Yeah.
I think breakthrough indication allows you to have more dialogue. But if you have a pre-submission call, you have 1 hour. So you usually prepare the slides with an expert like yourself. Part of the things we don't have the answers for yet. So you might come up with 3 or 4 or 7 questions that you want to keep to like maybe 30 or 40 minutes. And then you have the final 20 for like the Q&A. So you may need 3 or 4 minutes per slide to really explain what your strategy and case is, and then you can use the final 20 for like the Q&A. Usually, as you know, you submit these to the FDA, they take time and they respond with a list of questions. And then, say it's 15 questions, you may already agree with, say, 5 of them, right? So then you come back, well, okay, these are the 10 things we want to talk about. And that's where you kind of save the 30 to 40 minutes of like, hey, this is our explanation. This is our strategy. And then you have to ask them kind of curious questions. Like you don't tell them, hey, you're wrong, or this is what we're going to do. Forget it. So you're like, hey, can you further explain why you answered our question this way? Now you've really got to kind of pull it out of them. And as I said earlier, they're not always the expert. Well, they usually are never the expert in your field, in your technology, but they're the expert on safety and equivalency. They're the expert on powering, right? And it's their rules. So you've got to work with them to kind of teach each other to come to an agreement. So when you do submit the IDE protocol, it gets approved and doesn't get rejected, and then you can enroll patients and get approval. Or if it's a 510K, you just submit the 510K because there's a guidance document. But no, this is all business strategy. It isn't as simple as build it, do some bench testing, and file for an approval. I mean, this is a real business strategy.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And yeah, like you said, like really respecting their time, right? Because this is a free process, and I think one of the bottom lines is you're trying to develop a relationship with them. And just from your experience, like who's doing this presentation? Because some clients may ask me, "Can you do the presentation?" But I'm a consultant. I'm not part of Blockade Medical if I'm a consultant, right? But from your experience, who's doing that presentation of that PowerPoint when you ask? And what's preferable is my point.
Yeah, I mean, you may have 10 people on the phone call, but it's really it's really managed by one person from the company, and it's rarely, if ever, the CEO or if ever the head of R&D. It's usually a person who's running the clinical strategy. So if that person is a consultant, then that's the best person to run the call. But they could be a facilitator where we could have multiple people on our call. We could have a physician on the call that's explaining the disease and the product. That may be a few minutes or a slide. There could be the head of R&D that says, this is why we designed it. These are competitive devices, but we've made improvements to meet the physician's needs, as you just heard. And then you get into the body of the questions, and that's usually run by the regulatory person. That's been my experience in being on pre-sub calls for, say, the past 15 years and you might have people on the call, but they're on silent, they're on mute, and they're just really they're listening. But there's one person, primarily the regulatory person, who's driving the call, the facilitator, making all the introductions. They're introducing the CEO and key people within the business, but this is a regulatory call. This isn't a financing call. You're not raising money from the FDA. You're not talking to a material science expert to identify a new form of nitinol. I mean, you're on the call to get your product approved through the FDA. So this is a regulatory call, and it should be run by a regulatory expert.
Yeah. I think the way I kind of compare it to is that it's not a marketing submission, right? Eventually, if it's a 510K, a de novo, PMA, this is a regulatory submission. Don't say you're better than this person or that person or predicate-wise, right? Say you're just as good as them for a reason. That's the whole point of substantial equivalence. So because if you say, "Oh, I'm better than this product," well, go find the product that's just like you then. So you're actually you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot in a sense, right? Because I think people need to kind of switch the mindset from where they're coming from. That perspective is so key to get the right answers. Do you agree?
That's a good point. So there's non-inferiority and there's superiority, and you've heard of those phrases. So non-inferiority is substantially equivalent, and these are all fancy words to mean we're the same. Okay, if you want to go for a superiority result, and there may be a business reason to do that, I wouldn't go. I would rather just get substantial equivalence, do a non-inferiority study, then get to market approval. So now you can now market the product in the market. So without these approvals, you can't market the product. And the indication you go for, that's the only thing you can market it for. So if you got an embolization coil approved for a splenic artery aneurysm, you can't market it for the neurovascular field. Okay, so you get it approved to treat aneurysms, and then run your registry. Go solicit, some centers. Write a protocol, and then you can compare it to another approved device. Then, and then you can come up with a protocol or a number of devices used to treat specific aneurysms, and then maybe the conclusions can make some recommendations that this is better for these type of aneurysms. This is better for these type of aneurysms. For these sizes of aneurysms, we use less coils. that's where you can start to say that you're better or you're superior. But when you're getting the regulatory approval, I think the best path is just to go for non-inferiority, not superiority. Uh, the aim is to just get to market and commercialize, because sometimes when you get to market, your product didn't behave the same way as it did on the bench in that silicon model, or the 3 physicians who used it on the bench are nothing like the 300 physicians who are going to use it in the next 6 months, and devices kink and break and so forth, or they're not compatible with all the catheters you thought. So, choose your predicate, show that you're equivalent, get it approved and commercialized.
Yeah, yeah. I think I kind of want to tie this into your book, innovation and translation, right? So, you talk about, a lot of different countries you really explored in terms of their markets in that book. And, I'll speak a little bit about it. When I read it, I've read it a few times and I've given it to many people, including people like my mom, who's actually, not a biomedical engineer, but, she found it very simple to read and she found it fun, honestly. The way you kind of talk, and like it feels like you're talking to someone, like you're right in front of them, like we're doing this podcast right now. It feels like
Good.
you're there.
That was the
Like,
point.
yeah. How did you kind of create that kind of perspective, right? And for people to understand the value of these things, maybe touch upon that and touch upon the markets too.
Well, I ghost wrote the book with another author, but it was a lot of work. How she wanted me to look at the process was, me speaking. I wrote 8 chapter summaries of certain, my perspective, but certain times in my life, but how I designed, developed the products, built teams, because I was also an athlete in college. I love teams, but every process along the way to get a product into the marketplace. And I think I have 10 or 11 steps. Okay. And in each one of those steps, I probably made 1 or 2 or 3 mistakes along the way. I don't make as many as I used to. And I don't think all of them made the book. But early in my career in the 1990s, I traveled a lot to South America. Then I began traveling a lot to Europe. I'd been to India in the early 2000s. Then I started going to Asia. Um, and the people I met in those in those areas, in some ways were almost the same. They were all excited about the solution we had, and they knew how to use it. They wanted to use it a certain way. Getting them approved was always completely different. Getting it approved in Japan or China isn't the same as getting approved in the USA or in Europe or even in India. But yeah, it was never my intention to write a book. Oren Klaff, who is a good friend of mine, he's in Southern California. He's an investment banker that I worked with when we was selling Blockade to Balt. He became my banker, and he wrote the book Pitch Anything, which I read that book in 2015. I was flying, and I was at a bookstore at the airport, and it looked interesting, and read the first chapter, which he begins to explain when you're speaking to someone, especially when you're asking them for money. Okay. You've really got to catch someone's attention quickly within a couple of minutes, because the more someone talks, the more they get bored, they start to doodle or something like that. So most people put their team slide, like slide 2, like this is Blockade Medical, this is my team, you got 5 different people. You just wasted 7 minutes of your investors' time, and they're tired, they're bored. They're really there about the idea. So the first slide is, what's the big idea? Like, why is it so dramatic that we have to solve this problem? And then your second slide is your solution. There you are, your 5 minutes. That's really all the investor cares about. Okay. And he talks about that. The part of the brain you're talking to is the person's crocodile brain. They can't stay very attentive for that long. They either want to eat it, kill it, or he says F it. Because that's their attention span. You got 5 minutes to convince someone of, okay,
Yeah,
blah, 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 blah. So,
yeah,
and then they're kind of, they're looking at their phone, And then maybe 30 minutes later, you're talking about the deal summary. But at least they know what the problem was, what your solution is. That's it. And that first investment pitch is not to close the deal. It's to get the second meeting, make them interested. Oh, okay, this does feel a gap in our investment portfolio. Or if you're going to a strategic, this product fills a gap in our bag. Okay, I think we can make an investment here. But that first meeting, and people, I sit through lots of pitches, and you're just like, God, you just want to help the person. So like you like the first couple of slides, maybe some in the back, but you lose people. It's because we all have a crocodile brain. And I learned that from Oren. And then when we would hang out and talk, we'd have some IPAs together, and our youngest boys are the same age. And we tell stories like, man, you should write a book about how to bring a medical device to market. And I'm like, who would buy that book? He's like, I know 1,000 people at least. Maybe there's less, maybe there's more. Like, I'm not gonna write a book for 1,000 people. But anyway, I wrote it and ended up launching it during COVID, unfortunately. But the timing wasn't an issue. I meet so many, say entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs. I just came back from a meeting in Kassel, Germany at the DGNR. I gave a presentation on how to bring a medical device to market, and also how to get it financed. So there's so many physicians are now becoming entrepreneurs. They're investing their own money. And it's hard for anyone to raise money, to capture the attention of an investor. It's got to be a specific thing. Investors, some of them, they say they're agnostic to what the deal is, but some of them will only do a certain type of cancer, or they'll do a certain type of disease because that's where a family member died. Or they only do interventional radiology or orthopedic. So you got to understand who you're pitching to. But regardless of the fact, your first 3 to 5 minutes is the most critical of any presentation. And you just got to make that a home run.
Yeah, I think you hit a home run there, because I think getting to know the values of the people with you across the table, right? Like, know your customer, know your client, know them. Actually put an effort, put your energy into them, right? And saying like, this is, this is not this is part sales, part like human nature, because you kind of feel the same thing they're feeling in a certain level, right? And then going back to your other comment, like simplicity is bliss. So it's just like one of these things I learned in 4th grade, KISS, right? Keep it simple, stupid.
Right.
And
you learned that in 4th grade? I didn't hear that till I was like 24. Okay.
But I would say that that kind of ties into the time part too, right? Because time is attention, right? Attention is currency, especially undivided attention, right?
Right.
Like, right now you are giving me your undivided attention. You're telling your story. You're giving perspective to how you even came to be. And I think it's one of those things that's very valuable for especially younger entrepreneurs to understand, because I actually have a decent amount of people that reach out to me. How did you start your business? And I've been doing this for a little over a year in terms of the consultancy, but they fail to listen sometimes. And I'm not that old, but I feel like I've sat through a lot of good experiences, even Blockade. I listened well. You put me in rooms that I shouldn't have belonged in as an intern, honestly. Not many interns experience that. But the point is that I give those people the same chance. You know why? Because that'll accelerate their career. And when you do that, they start thinking differently. Like, they start being around you. They start understanding your mannerisms, how you pitch, how you treat people. How do you keep the same team with you for 15 plus years, right? They learn that. And you don't learn that in reading a regulation. You don't read that. That's human nature.
Oh, right. Forget it.
It's important, right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that is, it's important to me as well. And then you kind of learn that through your book. And, this is why certain books, stick to me, like Tuesdays with Maury. I tell people about that all the time.
Yeah.
Like, it's good to read different books, but the same books you read again to kind of teach those lessons to yourself.
Sure.
And that Innovation and Translation, or Tuesdays with Maury, or Wednesdays with Dave.
Well,
I'm
writing a second book. It's in draft. It's about the legal aspects of the medical device business. You need a lawyer for more fingers than you have on your hands. I mean, you need a lawyer for forming the business, forming that C corp. And if you don't form a C corp, then VCs won't invest in you. VCs don't invest in LLCs. You need an attorney to file a patent. Sometimes you need a regulatory attorney. If you don't like the decision the FDA gave you, you can get a regulatory attorney and sue the FDA. I don't recommend this. You need an M&A attorney when you're at the end of the day, you're going to have your company acquired or have a public offering. You may need a defense attorney because you're being sued for violation of a patent or a trade secret. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So, and I've unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, have had the experience of almost all of these. And it's a lot of things like I wouldn't scare an entrepreneur away like, oh God, you have to make sure you have a certain attorney for all these things. Hey, sometimes it just doesn't happen. You just don't get sued, right? And everything works out. But as the market gets more competitive and similar companies are developing similar products that have intellectual property, they're going to want to defend that intellectual property. Is anybody in front? And there's a handful of lawsuits going on right now in neurovascular, which I think I'll have put a lot of people on their heels. But these companies are defending their turf, and that's just the way it is. But then when you get to market and you start getting commercial traction, it isn't as simple as that. Oh, someone comes in and just acquires you. I mean, you need to hire investment bankers, to go out there and tell people, hey, this is what we're doing. It isn't enough to have your key opinion leaders on the podium evangelizing for you, or in the journals publicizing the registry you did. Sometimes you need an investment banker out there promoting, hey, look at this great company, Blockade Medical. This is what they've done. And then you catch the eye of a Balt who doesn't have an embolization coil. Then you need that M&A attorney that can help to close the deal, that works with the investment banker. I mean, all these things, it's not terribly complicated, but it's necessary part of the process. So then you can pay back investors, because when you're raising money, whether you're doing a safe or a note or an equity financing, a price round, or friends and family round, capital contribution, you need the attorney to draft the paperwork. So now you're selling an equity in your business, and sometimes like a note or a safe, that's an actual loan which will convert to actual equity, but you want to pay back the investor at some point, so you can do it again and do it again. So these are things that you learn along the way when you raise money and you sell equity and you dilute yourself, but you're diluting yourself in percentage to raise the share price, right? And then your investors want a return, whether it's a 2x, 3x, 10x, 20x. They want to get their money back within 3, 4, 5 years maximum. They don't want to get their money back in 10 or 15 years, but they definitely want to get their money back with some higher rate of return than the stock market. So they don't want to get a 10% increase over year. They want to get a 3 or 4 or 5x return. But they can't get the return unless you have an attorney to help you sell the company. So, I mean, all these things are all intertwined. They all work together. And it just comes with years of experience. It isn't like, you watch The Social Network and see how easy it was for Mark Zuckerberg. It was not easy. I mean, he got sued by the Winklevosses. Then he fired one of his partners. Then he's still getting sued all the time. Now he's in front of Congress. I mean, I'm sure he's grown and matured a lot, but he's probably like, damn it, I didn't think it was going to be this way. So
that's interesting. Talk about one thing though, in these like acquisitions, right? How important it is to have like a really like zip tied quality system. Who audits that in terms of the other side? That's very important, right? In terms of like how things are being transitioned.
Yeah, I've seen quality systems delay or derail a go-to-market strategy by an acquirer. I won't get into too much of the detail of the name of the company because I probably can't speak publicly about it, but a company in our field acquired a catheter for ischemic stroke and the catheter was developed by a contract manufacturer, and the quality system by the contract manufacturer didn't meet the standard of the acquiring strategic.
Wow.
And these acquiring strategics, Medtronic, Stryker, J&J, they've been around for decades, and they have very robust quality system, and we meet all the same standards as the quality system, but a lot of times their confidence interval that they accept is much higher and more stringent. So if we go to market with, say, 95.99, they get to market on 99.99. So therefore, less of the products can actually fail per lot, which is why you go to using a Stryker product or a J&J product, they're incredibly reliable. Not to say our startup products are not reliable, but that's that's another reason why the products are more expensive, is the level of confidence intervals and severity indices that they're using. And if the company that made the product, which passed through the diligence, it fills a hole in the bag, they'll have an acquisition. They may put an earnout amount on the tech transfer and on the first commercial sale. And usually you just want to get acquired for cash and walk away. Maybe you can be integrated into the company and you can be part of the sales strategy. So sometimes the company doesn't really care. We have it from here. We've been doing this for a long time. But then they'll put an earnout on the tech transfer, the commercialization, and if there's certain failures in that commercialization, that happened to Blockade Medical. A big part of the acquisition of Bolt to Blockade was our new Optima coil system, which was already in development as Bolt was acquiring us, but we weren't approved yet, and we got approval shortly after the transaction closed in 2016. But then we did our limited market release. So we only sold to certain centers. It wasn't a full commercial launch because we knew we'd probably have some introduction issues. That got resolved, but we had a period of time. We had to resolve issues like that and have a certain failure rate for detaching the coil under a certain limit. And we made it, but that was tied to a deal milestone, which is also tied to the quality system. And if you don't have a quality system that can, get market feedback, improve the product, and then do the testing to prove you met the new standard, then how do you measure yourself? But that's the quality system, and it's very, very critical.
Yeah, agreed, 110%. And I think explaining the value of a quality system in the beginning of these processes is important, right? It's not to do a lot of retro active work, saying let's go quick to market, let's do this 510K, and then guess what? You could have documented those design controls. You could have documented a lot of these supply evaluations, XYZ things. But the faster you move, you better be sure that you're kind of following the proper principles, right? And the proper safety and efficacy principles, I call it. Because kind of into what the FDA sees, because when you show like your requirements trace matrix, when you show all these kind of documents during the submissions, they'll understand the organization and the structure and the presentation, honestly, of that itself. I think that itself is like a strategy. What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, I mean, when you start your company, you have to get your ISO certification, and your ISO 1345 could take you a year. I mean, you can still be developing your product and creating your tech file or your design history file, but you've got to get your ISO certification. And some of that starts with getting a facility and getting all that installed or implemented by using a consultant, or you could just work with a contract manufacturer that already has the ISO cert. And that's a lot what we have done here with our 3 portfolio companies. Is we work with a company called M4D, and M4D was a spin out of Blockade Medical in 2015 that already had their quality system and they were developing products. So when we had the idea to do our RC Medical in 2021, we knew we were going to either work with M4D or work with some contract manufacturer that already had this, so we could start to create our procedures and processes and specs right from the beginning. So when our products are being designed and developed, they're they're all under rev control. When we're doing our animal studies, it's all under GLP, not under just regular studies. And this is something else, which is, I wouldn't say new, but it's almost required now, is to have a GLP study, which, GLP is a fancy word for having a quality system at your animal facility. So when you're doing your animal lab testing, that lab now has a quality system, and they go through rev control, and they have to hire a quality manager to make sure that they have the proper revs. There's rules and regulations, which this didn't exist in the 1990s or early 2000s. I mean, GLP was probably a new phrase, 15 years ago. Now it's like you have to have it. It's required.
Right, right. Yeah, that's great insights. Absolutely. You mentioned Mark Zuckerberg before, so I want to touch upon someone else. I want to touch upon Elon Musk and Thomas Oxley. What's going on within that world? Neuralink versus Synchron. A lot of hype around BCI and all these things. Like, explain the difference between the two companies and why they are or not competitors.
Yeah, brain computer interface is like I don't want to call it a science project today, but it's not ready for commercialization. But what it can offer patients, it's almost the sky's the limit, right? Synchron has been around, I'm guessing, 8 to 10 years. Theirs is an interventional product, so it's introduced through a catheter. Elon Musk with Neuralink is a surgical implant. So it is actually brain surgery, where the Synchron device, it's interventional brain surgery, putting a catheter into the jugular and tracking it up into what's called superior sagittal sinus. And they deploy a stent-like device that has transducers that can sense electrical activity in this part of the brain, analyze it, and send back a signal. Elon Musk technology does something similar, but they put their device in through some sort of brain mapping, but it is a surgical device. There's other companies coming out. There's another company called Neurobionics, also an interventional catheter. I think it's being developed in Massachusetts. It's going to do something similar to Synchron, but it's interventional neurosurgery. So it's catheter based. I mean, I do think there's going to be some pivotal findings, or say breakthrough findings, in like the next 3, 5, 10 years, which will raise the efficacy of these technologies. I think right now they're learning so much. I know some of the people at Synchron, and they were probably in the discovery phase, maybe the past, the first 5 to 6 years. Now they're understanding, okay, where their product fits and the patient population that they can serve right now the best way. And then I think probably in the next year or two, they'll begin to commercialize in that subset of patients. But I'm sure they have other indications that they want to try to get their device in tune for, to help a larger majority of patients. But I mean, it's a long road. Kind of like what we're doing with venous sinus stenosis. It's market development, so it helps patients. You just don't know how many, where are they, who are the gatekeepers, who are the referring physicians that can refer that physician to the interventionalist or to the surgeon. I mean, it's a big market. It isn't as if you're going in for an angioplasty in the heart or having an aneurysm coiled, which I can only imagine back in 1990 when Target made the first detachable coil, they were doing the same thing we're doing, but 35 years earlier, right? I mean, they had to go out and find radiologists that really didn't know how to use these types of devices. The number of catheters available to actually get deep inside the brain weren't around. They weren't available. So they were being invented. Then they were training physicians. The doctors were actually training the engineers also. So there was a full collaboration, which I would imagine that's what Thomas and Elon are going through, is they're finding physicians that have patients that they believe can be helped and treated, and they're co-developing products with the physician, with the business, and now they're going to get to market. And they're doing, pre-submission meetings. They're talking to the FDA. And I mean, this could take decades, but I do believe at some point, or over the course of this, they just keep on improving, and then there'll be a breakthrough, and then they'll find a group of patients that can really find the benefit of these technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if we all live on Mars one day, we're going to need a BCI to breathe properly, right?
I guess we need a hospital up there.
Yeah. So to cap off our conversation, just, a lot of young entrepreneurs are listening. If they're reaching out to me in terms of saying, how did I do XYZ things, give a take-home message to those folks, and it could be open-ended, it could be narrow. Like, what would you kind of say to those folks in terms of they're starting a company? Like, talk about that.
Anything you want to bring to market, it could be an iPhone, it could be a stapler, it could be a neurovascular device. You really got to solve a problem, and it's not just price. It just can't be, it's just going to be so cheap and inexpensive. That doesn't always work either. You really want to solve a problem that affects a lot of people. It creates meaning. I mean, Guy Kawasaki taught me this. I met Guy, 22 years ago. But solve a problem, create meaning. I mean, some people have problems. It's not a big problem. I mean, I guess the things we work in that I work on in the neurovascular field, I mean, they seem big to me and my customers, but other people want more speed on their iPhone. Okay, that's their problem. So, solve a problem. It's usually more impactful if it affects you or your family member, because then you're not going to give up on it. Find a problem that affects you and your community. And don't do it alone. Do it with a team of people. And the team is initially a couple soulmates, but then the team has to grow. Who can make it? Who can be your attorney? Who can be on your regulatory and quality team? So, if you can stick to those key points, then being successful is much more really going to happen.
Awesome. Yeah, great advice. That elevated me right now a little bit, Thank you. So I'd like to say thanks for your time, Dave. Thank you for, spending time with me. You always did that. Regardless, you still do that. Whenever I need advice, help, come to your office, need a phone call, a text, or anything. So very appreciative of your time. And I think a lot of people who listen to this will be appreciative as well. You said a lot of things in different perspectives that they'll understand that this is not a one-stop shop. You got to kind of combine all these equations to actually solve it. And you can make it simple if you know what the variables are.
Mm-hmm.
In that regard, I think that's the analogies I like to use. I'm not a mathematician, but there are very simple equations out there, and people have solved it. All right.
Sure.
So, thank you for joining me on the PranaTech podcast, and hopefully you're on again after you create this next book. I'm curious.
Okay.
That's
My pleasure, and thanks for having me.
All right. Take it easy. Thank you.
Thanks.